everyone, and welcome to BEaTS Research Radio, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to communicating science to the community. My name is Nicole Chu, and I'll be your host on today's episode featuring our special guest, Emily Chung. Emily Chung is a digital journalist for CBC News who covers topics in science, the environment, and occasionally clean tech and biotechnology. She has been working at CBC for 15 years now, and in the past has been a producer part of the science radio show, Quirks and Quarks. Before pursuing a career in science writing, Emily earned a PhD in chemistry from the University of British Columbia. Thanks for joining us today, Emily.
Thanks, Nicole.
We are so happy to have you on our channel. So you have covered topics ranging in science from the first animal that doesn't breathe oxygen to the latest development of COVID-19 vaccines. Do you mind walking us through the process from your initial brainstorming of an idea to cover to its ultimate release to the public?
Sure. We always have like a ton of ideas that we want to cover, and there's just not enough time to cover them all. So one of the things that we need to do is prioritize. And we do that. So we normally have like a bunch of stories that we're thinking of covering sometime in the future. And some of them, such as the IPCC report this week, have some kind of a news hook that makes it more urgent. So, this week I had to do IPCC stories. That was just the way it was. Other times, they might be studies that are coming out. And but other times we have topics that aren't so time sensitive. And so we try and think about, well, is this the best time to run that story? So for example, I was at a conference once where they had a study about how the 9/11 memorial was impacting migrating birds, because, they migrate in September. And so I thought that was really interesting, but I ended up not doing that story right away. I saved it for the 9/11 anniversary in September. And so that's one of the considerations we have. Once we've decided to cover a story, I also look at what kind of resources are available. So one of the key things for us a lot of the times is whether we have images, because of the way our page is laid out and that kind of thing. And also for people's understanding of a story, a lot of the times images are really, really important. And sometimes if there's a great image, I might cover a story that I might not otherwise cover. And if the images aren't available and I think they're really key, I might pass over a story that I really wanted to do. So, those are some of the other considerations that we have. So it's kind of like, when you're doing research too, like they have that kind of saying, a day in the library saves a month in the lab. You've probably heard that one. It's kind of like that with journalism too. So one of the key things I do right at the beginning is I check to make sure I have all the resources I have available, and then I do my research. I'm like, well, do I need stats to back this up? What kind of an expert do I need? And I really researched potential people to interview a lot before I contact people to try and get the best people to answer the questions that I need to answer. And then once that happens, I do the research, I do the interviews, I try and gather all the resources, and then I figure out what the best format is for the story. And there's actually a lot of options now. What's the best way to do this? Is it a profile? Is it a Q&A? Is it, is this a story where you need a lot of like a narrative arc, like those kinds of things. There's a lot of different options. And then once we figure that out, I actually write the headline and the deck, which is kind of like, just below the headline, and the summary first to really focus the story before I get going.
Well, that's super interesting to hear how your work has a lot of parallels between scientific and academic publishing, definitely telling your own story in your own perspective based on what you have accurately researched before, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so definitely that accuracy, we've definitely seen an infodemic of misinformation online during the pandemic, right? With sometimes inaccurate news being published. So, when you're covering COVID-19, what are some of the challenges approaching this ever-changing topic?
Well, I mean, I guess obviously one of the things is there isn't everything is coming out right now. There isn't as much. Well, first of all, everything's changing. So you really need to stay up to date. You need to check, is this the latest information and so on. And it's also a little bit harder to find experts. Like a lot of the times I used to rely on things like, well, have they published on this topic before? But of course, with COVID-19, like stuff is just constantly getting published and you need experts today. And so finding the right expert was a little bit tricky, and plus a lot of them were getting like a bazillion interview requests and so on too. So yeah, those were some of the challenges, and also figuring out, what do people need to know right now, and because there's just so much.
Yeah, definitely a lot of information available to us readers online. So, do you think COVID-19 has impacted your science coverage at CBC? Like maybe pushed it to more coverage, more attention?
For sure. I mean, for me, it made a big difference. Before COVID-19, I actually didn't cover health at all, pretty much. So we had kind of a separation between health and science. And basically, up until mouse studies, it was science. And anything that had to do with humans was considered health. And people, me and the other science writer, like we didn't really touch it, like that was the dividing line. But, with COVID-19, it was all hands on deck. And so I think now I am more interested in covering things at the intersection between health and science and technology. So I did a lot of stories on vaccines, and that's right in there. It's right where science is becoming technology, becoming health. And I think that's a really interesting area that we probably didn't cover enough before.
Yeah, certainly. Definitely, you've dipped your hands in many aspects of journalism. You've covered local news, science, and also healthcare right now. So, in terms of your opinion, which journal article would be your favorite one you've written so far?
Oh, I mean, journal articles, you mean like a news article or?
Oh, sorry. Yes, news story.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've written so many stories. I think in general, the stories that I'm most attached to are the ones, I think it's like you too, right? Like the ones that I've worked the longest and the hardest on. Um, so yeah, in general, those kinds of stories. There is one story that I did that I really enjoyed and I worked on for a really long time. And it was a story about a researcher who was on vacation on an island in Greece. And as he was walking along the beach, he spotted these footprints, and he was a footprint expert. And so he took some pictures and he kept thinking about this. And eventually he went back some years later and looked at them again. And this time the light fell differently, and he realized, well, I think even at that time he thought they looked strangely like human footprints. But it was really, really obvious the second time he went, and he got really excited because the human history in that area was not that, didn't go back that far. And when he looked it up, it turns out these footprints were from really, really far back, before long before modern humans existed. And it was a time when they didn't think there was any human-like animals there. And it was a controversial study. When I was talking to them, they talked about how difficult it was to get published. And they were criticized a lot when they actually did publish the research, like they were publicly criticized. And I thought it was a really interesting story. First of all, because there was this personal narrative there, and it was looking at the history of humankind, which is or the origins of humans, and that was also something that's a really interesting topic and a scientific controversy, and it sort of illustrated a bit of how science works and like the human side of science. And so that was a really interesting story to work on.
That's super duper cool to hear. And really, we can see how passionate you are about telling the story in your own way and accurately communicating this research and science. Yeah, so thank you very much, Emily, for joining us today and speaking on your work.
Thank you, Nicole.
And thanks for all the BEaTS listeners for your time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram channels at BEaTS Research. BEaTS Research Radio is supported by the University of Ottawa Hearts Institute, BEaTS Research Lab, and the Department of Biochemistry, Immunology, and Microbiology with the Faculty of Medicine. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you all next week.